Hello, welcome to Scrapbooking Station. It's been a while since I released a structure, but I love this one. So I'm calling it a shelf, but the shelf is part of your card front, so it makes it look handmade versus homemade. Tons of samples using different things in my stash, so I'm going to put the camera over my shoulder and we'll get started. To begin this video, what I want to do is take this card, which is what you saw in the photo, and pull it out of an envelope that is true to size. So this is a 4.5 inch by 7 inch envelope. And so what I love about this, well, first off, this little twist, and you've got tons of dimension, in this case, 1/2 inch. But I want to talk about terms because I'm going to be building this in some different patterns and different colors. So, like I said, 4.5 by 7. It's a 2-piece base card, but what I love, well, first off, it folds flat. And then this, what we're going to call a shelf, is part of your card front. So whether you put the hinge, and that's what we're going to call this from now on, so the hinge is how the front attaches to the back, and the first couple samples, that's what we're going to do, but you could make from a single base card. I'm going to talk about that later, but other terminology. So this is going to be the width of your shelf, so that's how much dimension you're going to put onto your card front. Again, it folds flat. This is going to be the height of the shelf. So let me get my materials together and we'll get started. So what I need to do my card front in this piece is going to be a long piece that is the width of my card base, because this is going to be the front of my card. And now to make the shelf. And so I've made some markings here and I'll take a close-up later. But what I want to score is first my tab, and that's what's going to stick back to my card base. Then I need a width. In this case, it's going to be 1/2 inch. I need a height. In this case, it's going to be 1.5 inches. And then I need another width scored, which is going to be 1/2 inches. So I need a tab, like I said, 1/2 inch, only because I want to keep things simple in my math. And I'm going to use my scoreboard. Then another 1/2 inch, then another 1.5 inches, and then another 1/2 inch. And then for my final score, because I'm going to make the hinge on the front, I want the full length of my card, which is going to be 7 inches. So I'm going to score 7 inches over this. Now I'll be back with that piece. While you're getting that prepared, what you're going to need also is, in this case, the back is going to be the full size of my finished card, and it's going to be the tall teepee. So I've got 4.5 by 7 inch, and this is 140 pounds. So the thickest thing you got is really good in this piece. And then lastly, what I want is a panel for the front of my card that's going to go edge to edge and top to almost bottom, because you don't want to interfere with that last score line. So let me get some of this prepared, and we're going to take a look at putting some of it together. So I erased my markings off the back, but what's really important is at this point you give all those score lines a really good crease, because when you're constructing this, you don't want to be messing with stubborn cardstock. And this all comes from Hobby House, so this is about 110 pounds cardstock. And of course, this is my hinge up here. We're not going to worry about that now. What I want to do, or what you want to do at this point, is decide whether you want this as your card front with a white shelf, or whether, in this case, what I'm going to do is have this as my card front, because like I said, what we're going to do next is panel it, and then have your dots coming up in this case, or your pattern coming up, because this is single-sided cardstock. We're going to work with other materials later. But the next step at this point is to kind of put this, well, first off, over that score line, and so it's the same width as my card front, but it's a little bit short because you don't want it interfering in here. Now, the other thought, the other school is that, well, you know, this is going to come up at least this far, and so you probably would need to put this panel all the way down. But you know what that does? That increases your stability, because this is going to be a 7-inch tall card, and so you don't really want it wimpy, and the best way to not make it wimpy is add another piece of cardstock. So let me get that attached, and we want to do that before we roll up the step, because that's going to go underneath, and then I'll be back. So once I have my panel on, it looks like this, and I know that I'm not going to want to stick anything else back behind my shelf. And so what you could do is put your adhesive here and kind of hold it, but recognize that when this thing goes flat, it's going to look like this. And so I'm going to use that to make life easy. I'm still going to only put glue on my tab. And when I do that, I'm going to stay away from the score line because I use liquid glue and I don't want to smash up into the bottom width of my shelf. So I've got glue along there. Again, I'm going to go ahead and set it in the flat mode, is what I call it. And it's going to go like that. And I'm just stick some weights on it. And that is how you construct your shelf piece. So while that's setting, because I want to make sure that is stuck on there good, I'm going to make the arm that comes off of the shelf. The arm in this case is going to be a little bit different in that this one is dry embossed, and this one I just punched out an edge. And this is a edge punch from Stampin' Up. It's an old one. And it makes this nice little lace border that kind of goes with these polka dots. So that's where I'm going to go with that. Now the only thing about this, since it's going to move with your shelf, you just need to make your tab at the top and the same width that you used for your shelf. So in this case, 1/2 inch. So I have a 1/2 inch tab, and then I've got a 1/2 inch, and then wherever I place this, the only requirement is that it touch the shelf. And so this way it will move along. So let's let that set. I'll get this, well, this is ready to go. And since I edged this, I went ahead, oops, let me turn this around, and edged my hinge as well. So when it attaches to my base card, and we're going to look at the inside of that later, it's got the same design. Okay, let's let that set and I'll be back. Okay, I didn't mean to suggest that you had to have an arm feature on your shelf card. This really is the base structure, and we'll look at another sample or two that doesn't have an arm attached to it. So let's get on attaching it, and I think it's probably more important that I stick it onto my front before I attach it here, because really I've got a lot of leeway where this goes. And the only consideration when you're placing it on your card front is that recognize that it's going to fold up, and so if I were to put it right at the top, what I'm going to end up with is beyond my card base, and that's something to consider. That and also this is contained within this panel. If I had things sticking up, then I'd have to take that into account also. But I want to go ahead and stick it the same way I did last one. So again, I'm going to use the fact that it folds flat to make life easy instead of trying to hold it in place while it's kind of propped up. So I've got that, or my glue on. I'm going to flatten this out, and I'm going to hold this back before the width. So I've just got this piece. So I know I want it somewhere in there. Actually, I have a stripe pattern, so this makes life easy. I want it centered, and so it looks like I can come right across here on this thin gray stripe. But you just want to kind of just make it sure that it's perpendicular to your design. So again, weights, and then we'll take a look at attaching here. Okay, this is another case where you need to consider whether you're going to put something behind here. So you can do that first to kind of have an additional layer. I'm not going to do that. My embellishments are all going to be on top. And so again, I'm just going to add glue to just above all these dots just to make life simple, because I know I've got a lot of leeway. And then I could keep everything flat, which I am going to actually, and then hold it down. Okay, the last little bit is adding some embellishments, attaching this to the back of my card front, and then it'll be finished. So I'll be back with the finished piece. In finishing up, I just added some die cuts. So first, I added a chunky bow, but note that it doesn't really get in the way of flatness. So where this is like 3 layers of cardstock, this is up on some pretty heavy foam squares, and that just kind of balances everything, as does the colors. This die came from eBay, so it comes in pieces. It's a bow die. And then for these flowers, trying to kind of bring in some of the imagery, I used cherry blossoms. This is a Tato die. So it has innies and outies and backings, and just in the same patterns and colors. Couldn't find my hang in there stamp, and that looks like what this guy's doing, so I just hand wrote it in there in black. Then the inside, well, I've got, first off, that really pretty hinge. Also, you know, the top of my card is in a pattern, so I just brought some of those patterns and this die. So for the next set of projects, I want to turn things around a little bit. And also I want to do another two-piece base, but this time the hinge is going to be on the back of my card. Again, I'm going to kind of decorate it and what's going on in the front, and so I'm going to have some hearts. So I'm going to clip it, and this is, again, the full size of my card, plus whatever this hinge width is. And so that's going to be the back. On the front, I'm going to use some double-sided. This is about 100 pounds. And so I'm going to show you the score lines on that because I'm going to leave the width the same. So I'm going to have 1/2 inch. So my tab's going to be 1/2 inch. The width's going to be 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to narrow to 3/4 of an inch for the height. And that's because I'm going to layer up to cover to create an overhang. So let me leave photos of that and we'll take a look at where we're at. So this is finished, and you can see where I've which is why I kept this height at 3/4 inches. And so this way I'd have this nice overhang for my shelf. And so that is a neat way to go about it. And I could put it back at the bottom, but this time I'm going to place it on top. And so I've got, this is a piece of adorable scoreable, and this comes from the Forest Friends collection. And so I've got a section of toppers. I matted it in gold. And I want to show you this because it doesn't matter whether you're doing front to back or back to front. So whether your hinge is part of the front of your card, these two-piece cards give you a lot more leeway. It'd be really tough to create a 4.5 by 7 inch card in this tall teepee style if I were to try and find a piece of 14 inch or actually 18 inch by the time you get the hinges done. So I'm going to place it like this. And the other great thing about liquid glue is that not only does it stick forever, but I've got a little bit of wiggle room. And what I'm looking at here is I'm making sure these sides are parallel. And I actually cut this a little bit long because what's important, well, first off, you don't want to work from the back, you want to work from the front so you can see that everything looks good. But also, I can trim that, and I am going to do that before I add my toppers. So, I am not going to have an arm in this case. And so when this gets done, it's going to look like this. I cut out some additional hearts because I want to fill in and kind of extend the design this way on the inside. So that's the other thing you need to keep in mind. If you're going to do some fancy edging, you want to keep in mind the what's up and what's down, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So let me leave photos of that, and I'm going to finish this piece off, and then we're going to look at a single piece of cardstock as your base in this design. So this is how my second project turned out, and yeah, I did kind of trim off the edge about 1/8 of an inch, and this way it's actually easier when the back is shorter than the front for someone to open it. I did not use the fact that this is raised up as actually just as a overhang in this piece. Put a topper flat onto the card, although I did have plenty of room, and then raised up another topper here. And I misspoke. This collection is called Foxy and Friends from Hunky Dory. So it comes with plenty of toppers, plenty of adorable scoreable. And lastly, added a bow. This folds flat, but it's still pretty thick, so it's a great way to protect, in this case, add balance. And then the inside, I had talked about kind of extending my interior into the top side of this, and so insert another heart, has some hearts here, and then a salutation. So all these dies actually come from eBay, and I just use the same cards as the other side of this, which is really great with double-sided cardstock, is that you can create a shadow pretty quickly. And I was taking photos of this finished piece and I noticed that my hearts are going the wrong way. And so what's pretty cool about two-piece base cards is that you can situate this anywhere. And if you do your front panel to be the single piece and the hinge to be on the inside, I could have turned this around going in the other direction as well. So this is how this piece turned out, and really it's all the same stuff, and the only thing I want to note here is that if you got something sturdy, in this case this is just another topper out of the collection, you can just extend it over here. You don't need an arm to protect that. And so I will take 2 photos of that, but once again, I am kind of running long, and I was going to talk about using a single piece of cardstock. And so the way I want to approach this, well, first off, I'm going to use typical 8.5 by 11. And that's something that is standard in the States. And so I'm going to make a 5.5 by 4 inch card. It's actually going to go this way, so I've got a wide tent fold. And what I want to do, you need about 2.5 inches actually for an overhang. But what I typically do is I decide on the width. And so this is 5.5, 4 1/4. And so I'm going to score that line, and then I'm going to take a look at what I've got left over. And so I've gone 1/2 inch for the width, and I did a 1/2 inch tab and 1/2 inch for the width on the bottom. So the tab is flexible. You can go however narrow you want on that. And then whatever's left over, in this case, what I have left over is 1 inch. And so I'm going to roll that up, flip that back, and cover it, and we're going to take a look at that piece. And then I want to do another 8.5 by 11. And this one I've already started covering, but this is 5.5 by 4 1/4 again. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut my strip at 4 1/4. So this is 11 inches by 4 1/4. And what I did actually is started on this end. And so I decided I'm going with narrower strips. So I have a 3-inch tab, a 3/8 inch tab, a 3/8 inch, that's hard to say, width, and then I'm 3 1/8 here. And then, so coming off of that, 5.5, and that's how I knew what this front panel is going to be. So this is kind of a version of a cutaway with my shelf over here on the right. So I'm going to cover that as well. I'm going to take photos, and then we'll be back to take a look at my 2 finished Halloween projects. In finishing up this first Halloween project, so first off, the shelf I'm just using to kind of extend this little thin spider web. And then over here, since this is a cutaway, I've got room to add some depth over here. So I've got a raised up panel, it's been stamped, I've got some shimmer paint, I've got another spider web, and then a raised up spider over here. Of course, I'm using all this dimension to kind of add, this is just a vellum ghost. And then I tuck this one under here, but the proportions and the scale are good on this, so I like the 3/8 inch border. Opening up, just another couple die cuts, kind of going with the whole theme in the shimmer paint. So that's how this turned out. I'm not as happy with this one, and that's because this 1/2 inch is a little big for a 5.5 by 4 1/4 inch card. And the other thing to keep in mind is when you've got more width, then you've got less space to kind of play with up in here. And so that first is all paper wishes, and then this is all primarily stamping up. But something to keep in mind, so this would probably would have looked better maybe with 3/8 inch width, and then at the 1/4 inch step would have helped out this card. On the inside, just another panel. So I'm going to leave photos of that, but pretty quickly, some other things that you can do. Well, first off, I've got a little book page here. I'm going to make a couple makes with that. But this is a great way to kind of jazz up your little book pages. So first off, I want to do something else with the arm, because in the last piece, it was kind of focal. And in this case, my arm is really just a mechanism to kind of move an additional embellishment. And that embellishment is going to be a pair of tags. So I'm going to cover up that arm totally. So just made sure that it was small enough and narrow enough that these tags would cover it up. And this way, when it comes out of the envelope, it'll kind of pop up. And the other thing, because I talked about the fact that when you add your front panel, you want to go down under your step, and so that gives it more stability. Well, the other thing that you might want to do beforehand, and so this one's almost done, but this step I actually created quite a bit larger, and I think there's another 4.5 by 7 inch piece. Yeah, it is. But before I went ahead and completed the shelf structure, cut a window, backed it, and this way when I put it together, I've got that mirror image showing up. Okay, I'm going to finish, well, I'm going to take photos of the finished pieces, I'm going to finish these and take photos, and then I want to talk about larger cardstock. So we're going to be working with A4 for those of you across the pond or have that, and then some 12 by 12. In this next piece, I'm starting with an A4 piece of cardstock, and this comes from Kanban. So it's got this really great coated, printed pattern on one side and it's craft on the other. And really, I've got the biggest problem with deciding, well, first off, I hate to have the back of my card in pattern. Just seems like a waste to me. And so, but like I said, the hardest part is deciding what you're going to raise up and what you're not. But I approached it very much the same way. So, created, first off, I know this is going to be 4.5, so I know it here it's going to be 9 inches, and then took a look at what was left. And so, in this case, I'm going to go with 1/2 inch, 1 1/4, and 1/2 inch. And then for my embellishments, I haven't quite decided how loud that's going to turn out, but I took a piece of that paper stash and just kind of divided up some rectangles. And so that's going to go on the front of this card. Again, I'm going to use this as the inside and fold it up like this. And I'll take photos of that. I think everyone's got 12 by 12. And so these wide tents, which is what this is, and what this next piece is, what we have in the States, and I hardly ever take it out, but there are these paper pads that come in 12 by 12, and there's tons of patterns, and a lot of times there's these kind of clunky little paper toppers. And so this is a great structure to use all that. So I took one of these pattern papers, again knowing that you're going to cover a lot, and then the shelf adds a lot of stability. So I've got the paper that I did use front and back, and on the inside almost covered it. But again, kind of having my shelf be a hidden mechanism behind a thin topper, and back it with some solid, this comes from Stampin' Up! Cardstock, and some gold Mary. Again, kind of adds stability. Use the fact that I've got a pattern down here, and that comes from this. So again, sometimes there's border patterns, there's all different kinds of things, but it's a really inexpensive way to make a really pretty finished project. Anyway, so hopefully I covered something that you've got in your stash. I suggest you give it a try, because like I said in the intro, it's a really professional kind of handmade looking card as opposed to homemade. That's pretty much a conceptual piece. So if you've never made card structures before, this is a good one to start with. Anyway, I hope you took something with you, and I thank you for watching.